together in some odd way. And I also, in the process of correcting that error, began to learn what a cave looked like. And I began to think to myself that if that's a cave, this is a cave. But I didn't have a point on that. I knew it was impossible. This is the most explored area on planet Earth for these. I'd done an expedition there. I'd been there for 17 years, and I'd done that specific expedition. I knew there was nothing else, but it bugged me. And so by March of 2008, I'd bugged myself enough to print out an A4 sheet of paper, grab my laptop and my 3G cell phone access card, and take my dog Tao and drive out into this region to check some of these targets, these potential sites. And I did something on that first day that is inherent and important in this story. I went as far away from Gladysville as I could get in this region because I knew that area like my own backyard. I knew it better than anyone else. I knew there was nothing in that area. I went actually into the city limits of Krugersdorp, a town outside of Johannesburg, where these dolomitic limestones peter out, and on the first day I found 21 new cave sites. 21 new cave sites. That started a sort of addiction in me, an obsessive-compulsive drive. 1-2 days a week I would go out. Sometimes I'd take my children, Matthew, my daughter, Megan, my dog always goes, colleagues, and I started finding caves and fossil sites. So that in this most explored region, by the end of July, I had found 600 previously unidentified cave sites and more than 40 fossil-bearing sites. Remember, there had only been about 18 or so discovered prior to that. 40 additional sites. Can you imagine the excitement in the community that this resource was right in front of us? It was a huge, exciting moment. I actually thought that is going to be my contribution. A legacy of discovery that will last generations of scientists. Of course, by the end of July, I'd moved back in to an area I was very familiar with. The area right around Gladysville in the center of the cradle of humankind. And of course, what happened? Could we lower these lights a little bit? Is there a way? Because this is very dark. An area I was very familiar with. I knew there was nothing, and of course, I started finding stuff almost immediately. Caves and fossil sites right in the vicinity. And then I had targets almost on the last area I was going to go, down this particular valley. Little cave sites that I knew were there because I had actually found one of those 4 fossil sites in the late 1990s right there in this valley. And I saw these targets that you see being highlighted right now. I knew they were nothing because I had been there before. And it was in that moment that I jumped in my Jeep, threw Tao in the back, drove down on this road, which you see traversing right here, that I had been on literally hundreds of times. And as I got out of the car and followed what I then saw was an old lime miner's trackway, I saw this. I know you're all shocked. But as I walked up to that little group of trees, I knew that I was about to make at least the discovery of another site. These trees mark where there's disturbed soil. Many of these caves are not big spaces like what we sit in today. They're eroded spaces that I'll describe to you a little better a little bit later, but they're eroded spaces in just the remnant of an infill, like a filled-in swimming pool, if you will. And where those disturbances take place, these sort of trees grow out of it. You can see how inhospitable the terrain is otherwise. And as I walked into that, I saw a couple of things which startled me. One was lime miners who used to mine these caves for limestone that would eventually be used to build Johannesburg would find caves, they'd blast away, and they would destroy them, taking the lime away and leaving scrambled eggs for us scientists to come along afterwards. This cave lime miners had found probably in the late 19th century. And they had put in one series of blasts, making a little tiny hole in the middle, which looked like, and hold your horses, this. I heard the gasp run to the audience. And they had blasted out, maybe with 3 blasts, a bunch of rocks, creating a 2 by 2 meter hole, and then they had left. I'd almost never seen that before. Usually, when they went into a cave, they destroyed it, because this was not just, walking out with your Hilti drill. They were dragging a big steam-driven sledge behind oxen. They would pull up and they'd have to really go at this. So they didn't generally do it idly. But they did here. The first rock I turned over had an antelope humerus in it, a fossil, in a concrete-like rock. That's what infills these caves. And I was stunned. I was a hill and a half away where I had been spending the last 17 years looking. This was right on my doorstep. And I didn't know it existed. I could also tell no other scientists had found it. We leave tells when we find something. We stack rocks together. We move them around. You know when another scientist has been there. They hadn't. But I was on a mapping expedition. So I looked around. I saw there were other fossils there. I took this picture. That's why it's so lousy, but I love it. Took some notes and walked up the hill following that old lime trackway and found 46 new caves. 46 caves that the miners had destroyed, all of them. It bothered me a little bit that I'd missed this. I went back to my lab, and what I didn't tell you is that we'd had a tragedy just a couple of weeks before this moment happened. The young man, my former postdoctoral student, had been killed in a motorcycle accident in London. But we had already transformed most of our lab. We had bought new computers. We'd even brought in all these bright young people who were going to transform our science into exploring what we had previously discovered and move us into the next generation. And we were a rudderless ship. And a young man came into my office, Job Kibbe, a Kenyan, sat down across from me and said, under these tragic circumstances, would you be my postdoctoral supervisor? And I said, no. I said, you're a lab guy, Job. I can't teach you what Charlie was going to teach us. I'm a field guy. But I've just found this site. And if you want to learn to be a field guy, let's go back out to this site. Let's see what it has to offer. And he said, okay. So on the 1st of August, there we went. Job, myself, my dog Tal, and my then 9-year-old son Matthew. It was a school off day. Don't worry. We went to this site. I told them this story, probably a little shorter than I told you of how I discovered it. We walked up, stood at the edge of this hole, looking down into it, and I said, okay, guys, go find fossils. And with that, Tao and Matthew are off, into the bush. I think I'll probably see them at lunchtime because they're off chasing leopards or zebra or giraffe or whatever. It's a big, huge game reserve. And I was standing there with Job saying, I think those miners probably did what I did, and that's why they left it alone. They found this first, because it's right at the bottom of the hill. They put in the blast. Some foreman walks up the hill while they're drilling the hole, finds all these other caves. He comes back. They put a blast in. Boom. They don't see much they want, and off they went to destroy those other caves. And as I finished saying that, Matthew says, Dad, I found a fossil. It's 15 meters off the site, in high grass. I could see him holding a little rock. And I almost didn't go, because I knew what Matthew had found. Matthew had found an antelope fossil, because that's all we ever find. For every one of these fragmentary early human fossils, all these isolated teeth I described to you, for every one of those that we find about 250,000 antelope fossils. But he's my 9-year-old son, and like you all want to encourage fossil hunting. So off I went towards him. I got 5 meters away from him, and I realized both his and my life were going to change forever. This was taken moments afterwards. He was holding that little rock in grass. You can see there was nothing else around it. The rock was sitting all alone right under a lightning-struck tree that he had tripped over. And sticking out of the front of that rock, now you really can gasp, was this. Oh, come on. I gasped, because from 5 meters away, I knew exactly what that was. That was a hominin clavicle. That was your collarbone right here, this little piece right here. And I knew exactly what that was, because there's only a few mammals that have those in Africa. Bats have them because they fly. This was too big. Moles have them because they dig. And this was too big. And primates have them. And amongst primates, only humans and our ancestors, because we are bipedal, have this sigmoid or S-shaped shape to them. You can feel it if you put your finger up here. And I, at that moment, happened to probably be the only world's expert on hominin clavicles because I did my PhD on them. I had done my PhD on the clavicle, the proximal humerus, and the scapula because we hadn't found any of them. They were scraps that we had found, little fragment pieces, no complete one in the entire record of Africa, so it was like the last thing to study that no one wanted to study. And I was looking at one. Matthew says I cursed. I don't believe that. But I took the rock, and I was staring at it, doing what any of you do. What else could this be? This can't be what I think it is. I turned the rock over, and on the back, sticking out of it, was a hominid jaw with a canine and a bunch of pieces. And then I did probably curse, although I don't remember that. Because I was holding what I was pretty sure in my hand was the rarest of the rare. Remember how rare I told you these things are? A few dozen skulls, you know, all these, just a couple of thousand fragments. Well, the truly rare things are what we scientists call partial skeletons. And we are generous with that term. That is any part of the cranium or head associated with any part of the postcranium or the body of one individual. And up to that point, there'd been about approximately 7 ever discovered in all of history. You would know some of their names: Lucy, Turkana Boy, Littlefoot, Lucy's child, and the other, and Dakika child, and the others are so fragmentary they just have numbers. And I was potentially holding number 8. I called the South African Heritage Resource Agency from the site to get a permission to take it off. There's cell phone coverage there, of course. And they said yes. I took it back to the lab, and my expert preparators began to prepare this concrete-like substance, and within days we realized that Matthew had indeed found a partial skeleton. A child, it would turn out. We knew instantly its third molars weren't erupting, its growth centers were still growing. It was probably 11, 12, 13 years of age. We could tell that immediately. And there was much rejoicing in our labs. Because these things can change institutes and university. Scientific structure can be built around them. And boy, we were eager to get back. But I had to wait for the permit to come through now because the rules change suddenly when something like this happens. On September 3rd, I received a call from the South African Heritage Resource Agency saying, you got the permit. And so, on the 4th of September, everybody with an interest in paleoanthropology, biological anthropology, archaeology, forensic anthropology, or who liked dogs went back out to the site.